Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to close your eyes for a second and just paint a vivid picture in your mind. The year is 1899. The world is teetering on the absolute edge of a massive mobility revolution. We're slowly creeping out of the era of horse-drawn carriages, right, and taking our very first kind of sputtering steps into the age of the internal combustion engine. So today, we're going to explore the incredibly fascinating genesis of one of the world's most iconic motoring brands. And we're going to do that by looking at the very first machine they ever produced. Okay, let's dive into this. So if I were to ask you right now, what did the very first Fiat look like? You'd probably picture, I don't know, a classic vintage car. But we actually have to go back way further than that. I want you to imagine this truly primitive era of early motor cars. These machines lacked literally almost every single basic feature that we completely take for granted today. I mean, there was no steering wheel. There was no enclosed cabin. The chassis and the bodywork were still heavily reliant on the design of 19th century horse-drawn carriages. We're talking large, thin wheels with wooden rims and double-leaf spring suspension. Honestly, it was effectively a carriage just waiting for a horse that was never going to arrive. Now, to really wrap your head around the sheer rudimentary nature of this early tech, consider this. If you were wondering if this vehicle had, standard light bulbs for the headlights to light up those pitch-black 19th century roads, the answer is a hard no. The first Fiat used actual, literal candles for its headlights. Yeah, candles. That brilliant little detail really emphasizes the massive technological leap that was about to happen. We are looking at a machine standing exactly on the boundary line between the old world and the modern era. Okay, let's move right into Section 1, the dawn of Fiat. We're traveling back to late 19th century Turin, Italy, right smack in the middle of this transition from horse-drawn mobility to the internal combustion engine. And here is where we find the origin of a name that is recognized globally today. Fiat is actually an acronym. It stands for Fabbrica Italiana Automobile Turin, which translates to the Italian automobile factory of Turin. The company was founded specifically on July 11, 1899. And get this, it wasn't started by some lone inventor tinkering away in a dusty garage. It was actually founded by a group of about 10 aristocrats and notables from Turin who were just deeply interested in this innovative new product called the automobile. And among these gentlemen was Giovanni Agnelli Sr. He's the grandfather of Johnny Agnelli, a name that will become completely synonymous with the brand's legacy. Moving on to Section 2, from bicycles to automobiles. So you might be wondering, how did this group of wealthy aristocrats actually get their first car onto the road? Well, the exact chronological chain of events started, believe it or not, entirely with a bicycle. The story centers around a guy named Giovanni Cirano. He was the son of a watchmaker. After doing about 8 years of apprenticeship in his dad's watchmaking business, Cirano shifted gears, pun intended, and began developing bicycles in 1888. He named them Welliers because, funny enough, at the time, English names just had way more sales appeal in Italy. Fast forward a decade to 1898, and he co-founded the Cirano GBNC company. By 1899, that company had evolved from building those Welliers bicycles to producing a highly successful motorcar prototype, which he also named the Welliers. But here is the absolutely crucial point, the real turning point in the story. That Welliers motorcar? It was a massive success. Actually, scratch that, it was too successful. People just kept ordering them, and Cirano's small companies simply could not cope with the overwhelming number of orders flowing in. So this crazy surplus of demand basically forced Giovanni Cirano's hand. He made a pivotal decision to sell the plans, the patents, and the plant to Giovanni Agnelli for about $400 for his share. To put that into perspective, that's a sum worth around $11,500 in today's money. And that single transaction directly birthed the first Fiat, as two smaller companies in Turin were taken over to form the brand new company. All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts in Section 3, engineering the first Fiat. Now, historical records actually refer to this very first machine by two different names. You'll see it called the 3.5 HP and sometimes the 4 HP. Visually, it was quite literally a carriage linking two different centuries. The bodywork was a style known as a Duick, crafted by the famed Turin coach builder Marcello Alessio. It featured these beautiful quilted leather seats to comfortably accommodate passengers and even had awnings to shelter them from the rain. But while the chassis and the bodywork looked like they were pulled straight out of a 19th century painting, underneath the seat sat a petrol engine that pointed directly toward the modern era of the 20th century. Taking a look under the hood, or, well, under the seat, really builds our understanding of early engineering. The mechanics were designed by an engineer named Aristide Faccioli. This car utilized a rear-mounted, water-cooled twin-cylinder engine, and for its time, it was incredibly sophisticated. It featured horizontally arranged cylinders with overhead valves. The exhaust valves were controlled by cams, while the intake valves were actually opened by vacuum. Pretty neat, right? Despite having a really modest 679 cubic centimeter displacement, it managed to produce 4.2 horsepower at 800 RPM. And that was enough to push this 680 kilogram vehicle, which is almost 1,500 pounds, to a top speed of 35 kilometers per hour, or about 22 miles per hour. Not exactly highway speeds today, but back then, a real game changer. Let's look at Section 4, Production and Performance. So we have the specs, but how did this rudimentary machine actually perform when it was taken out onto the open road? Well, the number 8 is incredibly significant here. Despite having a small, primitive engine, this early Fiat achieved a seriously remarkable feat of efficiency. It consumed just 8 liters of gas per 100 kilometers. For my American listeners, that translates to around 29 miles per gallon. When you really consider the technology they were working with in 1899, achieving 29 miles per gallon in a vehicle weighing nearly 1,500 pounds, that is a huge testament to the engineering brilliance of Faccioli's engine. Now, when it comes to the unique quirks of actually driving this machine, it's pretty wild. The power was transmitted to the rear wheels via a chain drive and a 3-speed manual gearbox, but it had no reverse gear, no way to back up. If you got stuck, you literally had to get out and physically push it backward. Furthermore, it was designed with a vis-à-vis body. That means it could accommodate 2 or 3 people, but they were sitting facing each other, so 2 people facing the direction of travel and 1 person facing backwards. Oh, and remember earlier when I said there was no steering wheel? The driver controlled the steering and the entire vehicle just by operating a series of control levers. Imagine navigating traffic with that setup. As you might expect, production was incredibly limited. Historical records show that only 8 examples were produced in its very first year of 1899. In total, across 1899 and 1900, somewhere between 24 and 26 total units of this pioneering automobile were ever manufactured. That's it, the whole shebang. This makes it an incredibly, incredibly rare piece of industrial history. Which brings us to Section 5, Surviving Automotive Legends. So this begs a really fascinating question. Did any of these incredibly rare machines actually survive the long, chaotic transition through the 20th century and into the modern day? Astonishingly, yes. Out of the roughly 24 that were ever made, at least 4 of these original Fiats are known to still exist today, and they are preserved across the globe in some very prestigious museums. 2 of them actually remain in their birthplace of Italy, housed at the National Automobile Museum of Turin and the Centro Storico Fiat. A 3rd one is located in the United Kingdom, and it's on permanent loan to the National Motor Museum in Muley. And the 4th? Well, you can find that one right here in the United States, sitting in the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. But here's the absolute best part. These aren't just static museum pieces collecting dust. For Fiat's 120th brand anniversary, a truly remarkable milestone was achieved. The UK base model, which belongs to FCA UK, was actually made fully roadworthy again. They prepared it to tackle the historic London to Brighton run. Now that's an approximately 60-mile drive from Hyde Park in London all the way to Madeira Drive in Brighton. This historic run was originally established way back when to celebrate the lifting of the Highway Act. You know, that was the law that once required a man holding a red flag to literally walk in front of every car to enforce a 4-mile-per-hour speed limit. Over a century later, this incredible 3.5 HP machine took to the roads once more.
As we wrap up this explainer, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the company's name itself. Fiat is an acronym for the Turin factory. Yes, we covered that. But as noted in automotive history, the word carries this intrinsic, almost commanding power to it. You see, in Latin, Fiat literally translates to let there be, mimicking the biblical creation phrase, let there be light. Honestly, it is such a fitting name for a company formed by a group of businessmen who literally willed an entirely new industry into existence at the very dawn of Italian motoring.
It really leaves you wondering about the sheer scale of innovation that happened right at the turn of the 20th century. I mean, think about it. A watchmaker's son builds a bicycle, demand absolutely surges, patents are sold for $400, and a global automotive empire is born from a carriage with literal candles for headlights. So the crucial point I want you to take away today is this. What other lost carriage designs and hidden engineering marvels paved the exact way for the modern mobility that we completely take for granted today? Keep that in mind the next time you start your engine. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.